Thank you, Richard. As mentioned by Richard, today's conference is supported by two very important partners, as with their sponsorship, we were able to organize a bigger and better conference. We wish to just take a couple of minutes to invite our sponsors up to stage to receive a token of appreciation. May I invite Mr. Yip Wen Wing and Mr. Richard Wee, and the representatives from IGM Construction Sdn Bhd, as well as LexisNexis. Ladies and gentlemen, it is our privilege to invite our Honourable Minister of Youth and Sports, Yang Berbahagia Khairy Jamaluddin, to deliver his opening speech.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera dan salam satu Malaysia. Terima kasih pengacara majlis Yang Amat Mulia Tan Sri Imran, Presiden Majlis Olimpik Malaysia, Bahagia Datuk Profesor Surya Raju, Director of the KL Regional Centre for Arbitration, Mr. Richard Wee and Mr. Yip from RWY Sports and organisers of the RWY Sports Law Conference, Dr. Bill Davidson, speakers, guests, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'd like to express my thanks to Richard Wee and Yip for inviting me to give the opening speech at this annual Sports Law Conference. I understand that this is the third edition of the event. I recall in 2013, Richard Wee did invite me to officiate the inaugural RWY Sports Law Conference. I was unable to make it that year, but we were represented by our Deputy Secretary General, and I was informed that the inaugural conference went extremely well, and that this has become an annual conference and an annual event that is much anticipated by not only the legal fraternity, but also the sports industry. I'm happy to attend this unique and timely event. The conferences that I usually attend as Minister of Youth and Sports tend to cover general youth issues, or more commonly around the improvement of high-performance sports. I understand that the primary purpose of organizing and hosting this conference is to create awareness and the importance of sports law in the sports industry, and that this conference in part is not just restricted to that. With the range of matters that will be discussed today, I think that this conference will go beyond that and try to come up with answers to some of the most pressing issues in sport, both in this country and beyond. I don't normally give a speech reading prepared text. I normally like to speak off the cuff. But seeing as this is a sports law conference, I thought I didn't want to get into trouble by saying things off the cuff. And, I wanted to make sure that everything I said was recorded properly. Ladies and gentlemen, I understand that sports law isn't restricted to the Sports Development Act. But as Richard said earlier, this is the primary statute in Malaysia that governs sports law and the administration of sports in Malaysia. So I'd like to start on that first, before moving on to touch on the policies that my ministry has put in place for sports development and how sports law can play a role in this. The particular act that governs sports development in this country is the 1997 Sports Development Act, as I'm sure all of you know. The aim of this act is to promote and facilitate the development and administration of sports in Malaysia. It spells out the role of the Olympic Council of Malaysia, the Sports Commissioner, and the Sports Advisory Panel, amongst other things. It also defines the role of the Minister in deciding on international sports events, in the case of dispute, sports science, and a slew of other things. In 1997, the Sports Development Act was a fantastic piece of legislation in an attempt to streamline sports in Malaysia. It also vested in the minister some extremely awesome and far-reaching powers. Over the years, it has helped put us on a decent footing as we aim to develop sports through agencies under the ministry and sports associations through the Olympic Council of Malaysia. However, as Richard correctly pointed out, there are parts of the Act that now require amendments in keeping with issues we've identified and how the nature of sport has changed over the years. For example, there are sports associations in this country that have not changed their constitution since independence, despite being asked repeatedly to do so by the Sports Commissioner's Office. There are also associations that bid for international events, win it, and then come to the government asking for money. In many cases, we are forced to help out for national interest reasons and to ensure that Malaysia does not lose face. There are associations that cannot be investigated fully, and it becomes very difficult for us to enforce in the event of non-performance, internal problems, or even financial mismanagement. Let me give you an off-the-cuff example about the sort of dilemmas that we are faced with. While the Sports Development Act vests in the minister tremendous powers to decide on dispute settlement, vests within the office of the Sports Commissioner powers, and sometimes far-reaching powers, to demand for certain information, to suspend, and even to deregister sports associations and also sports clubs. We are confronted with the fact that the public does not quite understand the separation of powers between what is administrative and what is related to performance. And I think the best example to give is football in this particular case. A lot of the public, whenever we have adverse football results, which is quite often, will write into me and say, please do something about FAM. Please change the leadership of FAM or the leadership of any sports association that is underperforming for that matter. They don't realize that under the Sports Development Act, the minister has a lot of powers to dispute, to settle disputes, but we have absolutely no power to determine the leadership of any sports association. We have absolutely no power to change the leadership of any sports association. Now, these are separation of powers which are enshrined in sports convention internationally. At the moment the government steps in and intervenes in the selection of leadership within any sports association, now that sports association is open to face sanction and even suspension by the international federation. And this has happened to countries like Indonesia and recently to Kuwait, where the government intervenes in the selection of office bearers in their respective sports associations, in this case football, and those respective countries were banned by FIFA. This does not just affect national teams competing in international events, it also affects your clubs from taking part in continental events. So recently, some of you may know that one of our football teams, Johor, JDT, won the AFC Cup. Now, they won the AFC Cup, of course, because they're very good, but they also won it because the particular team that they were playing in the semi-finals was from Kuwait. And in the second leg of that encounter, Kuwait was suspended by FIFA. That particular club was not allowed to play. JDT got into the final. Now, had I done the same thing and responded to the public outcry and suspended FAM or deregistered FAM, then not only would the national team of Malaysia not be able to play perhaps in the SEA Games in 2017, but JDT itself will not be able to go on to the AFC final and win it. So there are serious ramifications in terms of intervening in sports associations. So the public has to understand this, that although the Sports Act does give, in some instances, awesome powers to the minister, far-reaching powers to the sports commissioner, it does also respect the separation of powers between sports association and the administration of sports in Malaysia. But it does also require the amendments to the Act to ensure that on administrative issues, there are certain powers that can be granted to the Ministry and the Sports Commissioner to ensure that we do not intervene in the selection of office bearers, but we are able to justify, for instance, the expenditure of public funds for sports that are channeled through sports association, and to ensure that there is fiduciary duties undertaken well by those sports associations. So this is a balancing act that we have to try to undertake when we amend the Sports Act in the near future. Some of the more specific issues with regards to the Sports Act are as follows. The Sports Development Act, which was established to take over the Registrar of Societies' role on registering and the governance of sports bodies in Malaysia, when sports bodies transferred their registration to the Sports Commissioner, within 6 months, all sports bodies should have changed their old constitution to the new constitution based on the guideline issued by the Sports Commissioner. Unfortunately, this did not happen. Many sports bodies have archaic constitutions, which leads to many disputes and governance issues. The Sports Development Act does not give power to the Sports Commissioner's Office to order sports bodies to change their constitution. This is another one of those balancing act grey area. Although we do not want to intervene in the running and the selection of office bearers, we must be able to enforce and ensure that the constitutions are amended by at least national sports associations to ensure that they are up to date. The Sports Development Act also does not give the Sports Commissioner's Office the power to regularly and institutionally audit governance and financial statements of these associations. If the office bearers of that associations approve financial misconduct or malfeasance, there are no powers vested in the Commissioner to do anything about it. There have been several cases of that just in the last few years alone, where it has required the intervention by the Minister, suspension of the Sports Association, bringing in independent auditor to ensure that we can recover lost funds, often that come from the public purse. Too many sports associations are being created at the moment, which hampers sports development because it stretches our limited resources with too many layers within the associations. Many associations have the national, state, district, club, individual structure, in many cases are infeasible because of the number of layers.